Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into how an iconic American business built a truly global empire only to turn around and invent the exact technology that would threaten its very existence. It's a wild story, really. A story of unmatched dominance, incredible engineering, and a corporate blind spot so massive it literally erased a century of dominance practically overnight.
Just imagine it for a second. You create a completely revolutionary technology, a device that fundamentally changes how humanity captures billions of memories, but then you actively choose to bury it. Well, that's exactly what happened with Kodak. They were the undisputed titans of their industry, but they completely failed to protect their own future from an invention born right inside their own walls.
So why didn't they embrace it? It's a fascinating question about corporate strategy and, honestly, human psychology. I mean, why would a powerful, highly profitable market leader fail to protect its own future? Was it just arrogance? A lack of vision? Or is there a deeply logical yet fatally flawed reason why wildly successful companies get so paralyzed by risk?
All right, let's start with part one, the inventor's trap, and how they went about simplifying photography.
Okay, so before Kodak came along, capturing an image was frankly an absolute nightmare. You had to haul around this incredibly bulky equipment, mix toxic chemicals, and carefully handle these super fragile glass plates. It was a tedious, highly technical process strictly reserved for dedicated professionals. But founder George Eastman's mission was to strip away every single ounce of that technical friction. He envisioned a world where photography was incredibly simple, totally accessible, and designed for everyday people to just easily capture their own lives.
And they brilliantly condensed that entire vision into a single, unforgettable promise. You press the button, we do the rest. It wasn't just a catchy marketing tagline, it was a total revolution in the user experience. You would literally buy the camera, take your pictures, and then mail the entire camera back to the factory. They handled all the complicated, messy chemistry for you and just sent you back your printed photos along with a freshly reloaded camera.
Which leads us right into part two, the razor and blades empire and their explosive growth. To really understand this phenomenal success, you've got to grasp the razor and blades business model. This strategy is all about selling a primary product at a low, super accessible price, specifically to drive the ongoing sales of a highly profitable, recurring consumable. Think of King Gillette. He practically gave away razors so you'd be forced to keep buying his replacement blades. Kodak took that exact blueprint and ran with it to unprecedented global market leadership. Basically, once you bought one of their cheap cameras, you were locked into their incredibly lucrative ecosystem for life.
Because here's the crazy part. Kodak was never really a camera company. The hardware, the camera itself, was just a cheap gateway, a low-margin, one-time purchase. The true engine of their wealth was film and processing. Every birthday candle blown out, every summer vacation, every family holiday meant a guaranteed stream of cash for Kodak's chemical labs. They were, in reality, a chemical and film powerhouse, relying on constant, high-margin recurring sales from literally millions of addicted customers.
And man, this strategy fueled a nearly uninterrupted century of compounding success. It all kicked off with the release of the very first simple Kodak camera back in 1888. Then, the vibrant revolution of Kodachrome color film in 1935 completely changed the aesthetic of the 20th century. By the 1970s, this relentless growth had resulted in absolute, undeniable dominance of the global film market.
By the 1970s, they weren't just the market leader, they were a cultural monopoly. The phrase Kodak moment was deeply embedded in the global vocabulary. They were enjoying massive financial success and total dominance over the industry. But here's the catch. That exact scale of unmatched financial success actually bred the complacency that would ultimately kill them. They had become a juggernaut that seemed completely invincible to any outside threats.
But all that success sets up part three, the digital dilemma, and a major threat from within.
The real turning point? That arrived in 1975. Deep inside Kodak's own research labs in Rochester, New York, a young engineer named Stephen Sasson was quietly tinkering with something that was about to completely change the world. He had literally just invented the world's first digital camera. Now sure, it was clunky. It was about the size of a toaster, and it took a full 23 seconds to record a single black and white image onto a digital cassette tape. But think about what that actually meant. It captured memories without a single drop of toxic developing chemicals or a single inch of fragile photographic paper. It completely bypassed the billion-dollar razor and blades profit engine that Kodak had spent an entire century building.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 4, Protecting the Past and the Fatal Decision.
Seriously, put yourself in the shoes of a Kodak executive back then, looking at this new tech. On one hand, you have your traditional film business, Massive margins, highly recurring revenue from every single customer, and zero current business threats. It's your ultimate cash cow. But on the other hand, you have this early digital technology. The profit margins are unknown or just terrible. It's a mere one-time hardware sale with no recurring revenue, and worst of all, it directly cannibalizes your core film sales. Looking through the lens of 1975 corporate finance, digital looked like a terrible, self-destructive investment.
So, faced with this classic innovator's dilemma, leadership made a calculated, deeply logical, and ultimately fatal choice. They buried their own breakthrough. Driven by financial logic and a desperate need to protect their cash cow, they just shelved the technology. They simply couldn't stomach the idea of disrupting their perfect, wildly profitable machine. They prioritized the safety of today's profits over the messy, unpredictable reality of tomorrow's innovation.
It's a catastrophic misstep that leaves us with a pretty stark lesson and something to really think about. When a company prioritizes protecting the present over inventing the future, does it leave the door wide open for history to just pass it by?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly one of the most fascinating and frankly cautionary tales in all of corporate history. We're talking about the rise, the staggering fall, and the ultimate legacy of Kodak. Now, if you've been following our analysis of business giants, you already know that Kodak absolutely dominated the 20th century. I mean, they were a household name, an absolute titan of industry. But as the world shifted into the digital era, well, things went remarkably wrong. We're going to pick up right where that initial shift began, just to see exactly how an empire unraveled. So here's what's on the agenda for today. We're breaking this down into 5 key chapters. First, the digital disruption. Second, the mobile revolution. Third, bankruptcy and restructuring. Fourth, Kodak's 10 biggest mistakes. And finally, lessons for every business. All right, let's jump right into Chapter 1, the digital disruption and the rise of digital rivals. So in the late 90s, the shift away from film really started gaining momentum. Suddenly, you didn't need to pay for film, and you certainly didn't need to wait around for prints. Because of this, consumer behavior fundamentally and permanently shifted. But here's the profound irony of the whole situation. How did Kodak, the company that literally invented the first digital camera back in 1975, fail to profit from it? I mean, they held the golden ticket right in their hands. They had the patents, they had the early technology, but a deep-seated fear of cannibalizing their highly lucrative film business pretty much blinded them to the reality that the future was already here. And you know, this hesitation created a really painful contrast. While Kodak was moving at a total turtle's pace to protect their legacy film sales, competitors like Canon, Sony, Nikon, and Fujifilm were taking off like rockets with these aggressive all-in digital strategies. Now, you might be wondering, did Kodak ever really stand a chance against these massive tech and imaging giants? The answer is absolutely yes. They had a huge head start, but they completely failed to adapt. While companies like Fujifilm heavily diversified their technology and Sony leaned entirely into electronics, Kodak just tried to use digital tech to drive more people to print photos on Kodak paper. It was unfortunately a total misread of the market. Moving on to Chapter 2, the mobile revolution, the final blow. Okay, so just as Kodak was belatedly trying to catch up in the digital camera space, a completely new wave crashed down on them. If we trace the timeline, the 90s kicked off the digital shift, but the late 2000s brought the smartphone boom. Companies like Apple introduced devices that put a really high-quality camera in everyone's pocket at all times. And this didn't just accelerate the decline of film, it completely gutted the standalone digital camera market that Kodak was desperately trying to pivot into. This double disruption was absolutely catastrophic. Film sales plummeted into a free fall, profits shrank to basically nothing, and Kodak began accumulating this massive mountain of debt just to keep the lights on. It literally brought an industry titan to its knees. Which brings us to Chapter 3, bankruptcy and restructuring, the fall and rebirth. So the absolute crucial point in this whole story is the year 2012. After years of bleeding cash and losing their market dominance, 2012 was the year the music finally stopped. Kodak, a company that once commanded roughly 90% of film sales in the United States, which is just a massive number if you think about it, was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was a massive shock to the corporate world and honestly a really sobering realization that past dominance offers absolutely zero protection against future disruption. Now, to survive this, Kodak had to take some incredibly painful steps. They auctioned off a massive portfolio of their digital imaging patents to tech consortiums for hundreds of millions of dollars, right alongside a drastic corporate restructuring that shed legacy costs and significantly shrank their workforce. Ultimately, they executed a hard pivot away from consumer cameras entirely, and they actually found a new, much quieter life in commercial printing, advanced materials, and specialty imaging. So they survived, but the empire as we knew it was gone. Let's look closer at Chapter 4, Kodak's 10 biggest mistakes and their strategic errors. Looking at the root causes, it all really started with mistake number 1, a desire to protect old film profits over innovation. When Kodak engineer Steve Sasson invented the digital camera in 1975, management literally told him to hide it because it didn't use film. Can you believe that? This isolation led straight to mistake 2, completely misreading shifting consumer behavior. They assumed people just wanted physical prints rather than the convenience of instant digital sharing. Because they treated digital as a passing fad, we get mistakes 3 and 4, drastically underestimating digital rivals and incredibly slow technology adoption. And by the time they realized the old razor and blades model, selling cheap cameras to sell expensive film, wasn't going to work in a digital world where taking a photo is essentially free, well, mistake number 5 hit. They failed to update their business model before it was simply too late. Now, this initial denial bred mistake number 6, a crippling fear of internal disruption. Kodak was so terrified of killing their own cash cow that they essentially just let their competitors do it for them. This was worsened by numbers 7 and 8, ignoring the smartphone wave driven by a highly inflexible leadership culture. It was heavily dominated by chemical engineers who just couldn't pivot to a software mindset. Instead of cutting losses early and adapting, they managed for the next quarter's earnings, which leads to mistake number 9, accumulating massive debt. All of this culminates in number 10, a complete lack of long-term vision. That fundamentally sealed their fate against incredibly agile competitors like Apple and Sony. All right, finally, Chapter 5, Lessons for Every Business, Preventing a Similar Fate. When we contrast Kodak's failures with modern business requirements, a really clear blueprint emerges. Where Kodak operated from this intense fear of disruption and a desperate need to protect legacy profits, today's businesses must operate from a place of constant transformation. It demands rapid tech adoption and an absolute obsession with customer focus, rather than an obsession with protecting one specific legacy product. So if you are building or investing in a business today, the lesson here is incredibly clear. You have got to be willing to disrupt yourself, or I guarantee you someone else will do it for you. Which leaves us with this profound and honestly quite sobering takeaway. No company is too big to fail if it refuses to evolve. It really doesn't matter how many patents you hold, how dominant your market share is today, or how universally recognized your brand name might be. Gravity applies to everyone. The exact moment you stop evolving to meet the actual changing behavior of your customers, the clock starts ticking on your relevance. I want to leave you with this really powerful thought. The greatest danger in business isn't competition. It's believing today's success guarantees tomorrow's survival. Kodak's success was legendary for sure, but their assumption that it would just last forever was their ultimate downfall. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this. Drop a comment below and let me know which of Kodak's 10 mistakes actually surprised you the most. Was it hiding the first digital camera? Missing the smartphone wave entirely? Let's discuss it. And of course, if you found this explainer valuable, please go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the strategies that make or break the world's biggest companies. Thanks for joining me today, and keep evolving.